the heart and soul of the RFK Center, and it's a great honor to share this moment with her. Robert Kennedy believed that one person can make a difference, and all of us should try to make a difference in the lives of others. He forged partnership with civil rights leaders in my Native American South, farm workers in California, and Native Americans at Pine Ridge and beyond. Today, the RFK Center Partners for Human Rights is the only program of its kind, forging multi-year partnerships with recipients of the annual RFK Human Rights Award. The RFK Center serves the real needs of its laureates, helping them achieve their social justice goals. We are here to honor a courageous leader. This year's Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award recipient Frank Mugisha. Frank was selected from over 100 nominees, and we'd like to thank the panel of judges, Gay Madugo, Bill Schultz, and Mikhail Matua, Claudio Grossman, and Suma Rahman, for their commitment to the difficult task of choosing the RFK laureate. Frank risked his life standing up for civil rights, for political and human rights of sexual minorities of Uganda, and advocating for laws and policies that respect the dignity, the hopes, and the aspiration of all Ugandans. Today's award ceremony marks the beginning of the Robert F. Kennedy Center's partnership with Frank Mugisha and his organization, Sexual Minorities of Uganda, or SMUG. By the way, Frank is also on Twitter, and he urges everyone to follow him. I will do that, Frank. We must do this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God and man command it, although they do command it, not because people in other lands wish it so. We must do it for the single fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do. Robert Kennedy's daughter, Carrie Kennedy, has taken these truths to heart. I met Carrie when she interviewed me for her best-selling book, Being Catholic Now. I'm still a practicing Catholic. I love my church as well. For 30 years, she has crisscrossed the globe, bolstering the work of human rights defenders. Please welcome the president of the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights, Ms. Carrie Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. I want to say a special thanks to Mike Posner, Assistant Secretary of State. Mike Posner, who is one of my best friends and my mentor in human rights and has been the best Assistant Secretary for Human Rights that we've ever had. So let's say thanks to Mike. And his deputy assistant is here too, Dan Baer, who worked for my brother Max and taught my nephew Michael, and who we worked with in Cambodia a few months ago, and he was so incredibly courageous standing up to that government. So I just want to say a big thank you to you as well. Ambassador Guest is here. Senator Chris Dodd, who we all adore, is right there. Thank you for coming. My mother, of course, Kate Kennedy, Townsend, David, Michael, Vicki, and Vicki, thank you all for coming. There is John Kerry. Thank you for coming, John, Senator. And also thank you Thank you to Senators Kerry and Senator Schumer and their staffs for making this ceremony possible. Members of our board and leadership council, Peter Edelman, Tom and Lori McPherson, Juan Mendez, Elisa Massimino, and John Boyer are here. And special thanks to human rights defender Sister Diana Ortiz, the family of Dr. Kwan, who won the RFK Human Rights Award a few years ago, and Dr. Muhammad Ahmed is here, who is the only medical doctor born and raised in Darfur and started the Center for Victims of Torture here. So he's right there with us. Thank you. And again, special guests, Susie Wilson, Andy Tobias, Sam Donaldson, Dick Iannuzzi. We're so happy all of you are here. And there's a lot of former board members. Thank you, everybody in this room. Thank you for coming. I also really want to say thank you to the RFK staffs, starting with Lynn Delaney, who is a force of nature, and all of the RFK staff. I'm going to ask you all to stand. Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to read to you the beginning of a story in the New York Times. In March 2009, 3 American evangelical Christians whose teaching about curing homosexuals have been widely discredited in the United States arrived in Uganda's capital to give a series of talks. The theme of the event, according to its Ugandan organizer, was the gay agenda, that whole hidden and dark agenda, and the threat homosexuals pose to Bible-based values in the traditional African family. For 3 days, thousands of Ugandans, including police officers, teachers, and national politicians, listened raptly to the Americans, who were presented as experts on homosexuality. The visitors discussed how to make gay people straight, how gay men often sodomize teenage boys, and how the gay movement is an evil institution whose goal is to defeat the marriage-based society and replace it with a culture of sexual promiscuity. 1 month later, after conferring with the Americans, a bill was introduced in Parliament to impose a death sentence for homosexual behavior, unquote. That conference and the follow-up legislation exemplify the attacks endured by Uganda's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, LGBTI community, and give us some sense of the quality of mind and spirit that enables this year's Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award laureate, Frank Mugisha, to face the difficulty, the danger, the pain of activism. In November 2010, a Uganda news magazine published a series of articles outing members of the LGBTI community beneath a headline which read, "Hang them." In response, neighbors surrounded one outed lesbian's home, hurling rocks. Other victims of the involuntary outing were threatened with death and beaten. When confronted by the violence he had instigated, the magazine's editor responded, quote, "I was only trying to protect Ugandans from those seeking to recruit children to homosexuality," unquote. On January 26, 2011, Frank Mugisha's dear friend and colleague and co-worker at Sexual Minorities Uganda, or SMUG, David Cato, whose photograph appeared with Frank's in the same issue, was beaten to death. In response, the same editor justified outing the victims by saying, "We want the government to hang people who promote homosexuality, not for the public to attack them." In a country where 96% of the population believes that homosexuality should be rejected by society, LGBTI citizens face bullying, discrimination, arbitrary arrest, unlawful detention, cruel punishment, torture, and death based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Activists who work to expose such abuses are frequently targeted. The homophobia of Uganda's citizenry is not only a cultural phenomenon, it is enshrined in law. Under Uganda's legal system, homosexuality is a criminal offense that carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. The anti-homosexuality bill proposed in 2009 and still under consideration by the Parliament seeks to further entrench discrimination and hatred against LGBTI people. It would make consensual homosexual acts punishable by life imprisonment on the first offense and by the death penalty on subsequent offenses. It would effectively prevent medical treatment and make failure to report punishable by imprisonment. Even if the bill fails, its supporters have already called for harsher enforcement of the country's existing draconian laws. It is in this atmosphere of legalized brutality that Frank Mugisha leads SMUG, an umbrella group for LGBTI activism in Uganda. When Frank was 7, his father was brutally murdered, and his mother raised Frank and his younger brother outside of Kampala. Frank attended an all-boys Catholic school until college, where homosexuality was considered sick and sinful, and those suspected of being gay faced humiliation and expulsion. He prayed to God that his burden would be lifted. But, like Jeremiah, he became the unwilling prophet of tolerance and compassion. During high school, the time of life when most kids are struggling just to fit in, Frank spoke forcefully on behalf of sexual minorities. And then at 14, when he knew he would be ostracized and hated, he came out to his friends. Frank Mugisha exemplifies Robert Kennedy's vision of moral courage. Even as a teenager, Frank braved the disapproval of his fellows, the censure of his colleagues, the wrath of his society. For moral courage, Frank paid a high price. Members of his family stopped speaking to him. Friends denied knowing him. No one would hire him. He was harassed, humiliated, and abused, and beaten. He faced hostility, threats, intimidation, even death. With undaunted courage, he forged ahead, offering counsel and refuge to those who felt isolated and abandoned because of the way they were born. In 2004, emboldened by an article he read about gay rights activism, Frank founded Icebreakers Uganda to offer support for sexual minorities. As a result of his advocacy, Frank was threatened and targeted for arrest. He had to flee his country to seek safety where he could have stayed and lived in peace. Instead, at grave personal risk, he returned to Uganda, where he and 7 courageous colleagues took part in public media campaign proudly identifying themselves as sexual minorities. Soon after, Frank assumed leadership of SMUG, a network of Ugandan organizations advocating on behalf of the LGBTI minority. Now, this is what you have to understand about Uganda. There are 32 million people in Uganda. There are approximately, statistically, 500,000 people who are LGBTI. 500,000. There are 10 people who are known activists on this subject. Of those 10, there are 5 who will get up in front of a microphone and speak about it. It's 5 in 32 million. Under Frank's leadership, SMUG advocates for equality, bolsters LGBTI visibility through media and literature, and empowers activists through leadership and social entrepreneurship trainings. SMUG also fights against HIV/AIDS in LGBTI communities and speaks out against gender and sexual-oriented based violence. Frank described his work simply. He said, "I wake up every morning and I say, I have to do what I have to do. If I receive a phone call that someone is already in jail and I risk arrest myself by going to the prison, I just go. If I receive a phone call about someone who needs my support about coming out, I just meet them and talk to them." Just as Frank is there to answer the call, we at the RFK Center call for change. Today, Frank, the Robert F. Kennedy Partners for Human Rights, joins you in your struggle. We are committed to bringing all the resources of our organization to our new 6-year partnership with you. We will listen to your needs. We will develop a long-term plan. We will work with you side by side, shoulder to shoulder. You will never be alone. Robert Kennedy said, "Those with the courage to enter the moral conflict will find themselves with companions in every corner of the globe." From this day forward, we at the RFK Center are your companions. I would like everyone in this room to stand up. And I would like you all to say with full conviction, so Frank knows it in every single bone, we are on your side. We are on your side. Thank you. Look around this room, Frank, and know every person here is on your side. Thank you. There is a Ugandan proverb that says, old men sit in the shade because they planted a tree many years before. Frank, I believe that because of your courage and with the support of your companions, you will enjoy the shade of the tree you have planted, as will thousands of Ugandans for whom you have advocated. It is an honor for me to join with my mother, Ethel Kennedy, and with Senator John Kerry to present you with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award.
Thank you, Carrie, for your inspiring words and your great leadership. I want to acknowledge that Senator Whitehouse just arrived as well. It gives me great honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Senator John Kerry. John Kerry has helped provide health insurance for millions of low-income children. He has fought to improve public education, protect our natural environment, and strengthen our economy. He has distinguished himself as one of our nation's most respected voices on national security and international affairs. He has authored and passed major legislation of international drug trafficking, global AIDS, international money laundering, humanitarian aid, and climate change. He has negotiated the UN's Genocide Tribunal to protect and prosecute war crimes in Cambodia's killing fields. Please welcome the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the 2004 Democratic nominee for President of the United States, a 5-term United States Senator, a decorated Vietnam veteran, Senator John F. Kerry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much. Last night I picked up a new way to deal with '04. I just stand up in front of people and say, oops. It's a lot shorter. Not easier. Anyway, Carrie, thank you. Donna, thank you for that. Where'd Donna go? She disappeared. Donna, thank you for everything you do, and thank you for a wonderful introduction. And Carrie, thank you for your extraordinary eloquence, your passion, and your unbelievable commitment and ability that you bring to the task of carrying on your father's legacy. It's brilliant, and we all are in awe of it. And Ethel, it's an honor always to be here with you and with all of the supporters and friends of the Center's efforts through the years. It's really an honor for me to be able to share in the RFK Center's commitment to change the way that we treat each other here on Earth, and indeed to join in the Center's efforts to seek a newer world. I think it's fair to say that the center's efforts, you just look at these flags surrounding us here and the names on them, and you understand the degree to which the center's efforts have not only kept Bobby's legacy alive, but they have kept the cause of human rights at the forefront of our politics, our policies, and our consciences. This room is the right place to gather and celebrate moral courage. It is now, as you all know, the Kennedy Caucus Room, named for three brothers, each of whom broke ground, took political risks, and advanced the cause of human rights. Embroiled as I am right now in the travails of the Supercommittee, I am daily reminded how much we could use Teddy's legislative skill and vision today, and Robert Kennedy's leadership, eloquence, and passion exhibited throughout a career that was so obviously all too short, brings us together to recommit ourselves to the unfinished tasks of building that newer world, and also to celebrate the special courage of one man's example. The truth is that some of our greatest accomplishments and advances in expanding the cause of human rights have come not because of legislative decree or judicial fiat, but through the awesomely courageous acts of individuals who have stood up against evil because they believed in something bigger than their own comfort, bigger than their own safety, bigger even than their own lives. Today, the RFK Center honors another brave human being who, frankly, stood up for all of us. Frank Mugisha, as you heard in listening to Kerry's presentation to him of this award, has had to pay an extraordinary price for his courage. His colleague, David Cato, was brutally murdered. And as you learned from Kerry, Frank has lost jobs, friends, even the support of some family members. And for a time, he even lost his homeland. He's had to withstand hatred, vitriol, and small-minded fear that criminalizes people for their identity. And he's had to withstand it all because he dared to stand up and declare that he is a gay man, a gay Ugandan, a gay human being. Today, we celebrate this special man whose words and actions daily remind us that equality is not something that we can parse out to some and deny to others. The rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, these are not something that can be doled out only in select circumstances. They are basic human rights, and human rights are universal, not negotiable. Frank has chosen to climb a particularly steep mountain. There are those in Uganda who are not satisfied merely with criminalizing homosexuality. They want to impose the death penalty. That abhorrent impulse represents the most extreme form of a far more pervasive kind of prejudice. It is a prejudice that is found not only in Uganda, but throughout Africa and around the world. It may shock you, but today, over 80 countries in the world criminalize homosexuality. If this gross prejudice is to stop, and it must, then we must stop it. People of good conscience have to take action. And we can do so with the same energy and the same focus that we use to fight all civil rights battles, here and abroad, by standing up and refusing to cower in the face of hatred and oppression. Edmund Burke reminded us that all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So the history of our moral advances on this planet is the story of good men and good women who understood that truth and who did something about it. Every name on these flags is the name of that kind of story. And here in our own country, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, who still serves with us, all understood that they needed to stand up and march and even potentially die in order to topple the status quo and topple injustice. And around the world, some of today's greatest advocates for change, from Nazarene Sotoudeh to Liu Xiaobo in China, they sit in prison today as we sit here simply because they had the courage to stand up and fight for rule of law and for basic human rights and to be able to express themselves. And there are so many, my friends, whose names none of us will ever know. They're not going to receive prizes. Their courage goes unremarked, but is all the more remarkable because they put their lives on the line in the face of beatings and torture and imprisonment and even death in the near certainty that their sacrifice will be anonymous. Think about that. That's a kind of courage that is so powerful, it is really hard to fathom. As Robert Kennedy said, few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. By standing up for the rights of sexual minorities, Frank Mugisha has earned a place among those rare men and women who have demonstrated a willingness to brave the wrath of society. We need that kind of courage today more than ever, not only for what it can change in Uganda, and not only for what it can change for gay men and women everywhere, but we need it in our own lives because without it, I fear nothing will change. Around the world, the fundamental struggle for dignity, for economic justice, for political freedom, for personal expression continues every single day and in many different forms. And without extraordinary courage, those struggles will remain anonymous and will, by definition, therefore, be less successful. This year, millions of brave individuals stepped forward as the fight for dignity exploded in the Middle East. The results have been remarkable. Last week, Tunisia held its first open elections in 50 years. Egypt is preparing to have parliamentary elections and the opportunity to write a new constitution. And Libya rid itself of a dictator who had stripped away every element of civil society and political expression. Unfortunately, for each of these victories, there is a counterexample. In Bahrain, doctors were sentenced to 15 years in prison for the crime of treating protesters. In Syria, thousands have died protesting against a regime that has lost any claim of credibility or legitimacy it might ever have had. So we know that too often the struggle for dignity does not end decisively with a dictator dead or in prison. Often indignity just festers while persecution dominates and persists. According to Freedom House, 2010 was the 5th consecutive year in which global freedom declined. That's nearly 2.5 billion people of the now 7 who live in societies that do not respect fundamental political rights or civil liberties. 1/3 of the global population faces increasing harassment when seeking to practice their faith. And particularly abhorrent, there are millions of victims of slavery, bondage, and trafficking around the world. And these aren't just statistics, they're not just words in a politician's speech. They are a challenge to the decency of every single one of us. These are real lives that have been abandoned to the most depraved instincts. Little girls raped in the Democratic Republic of Congo, children forced to starve in Somalia, indigenous farmers thrown off their land in Colombia, journalists disappeared in Chechnya, priests jailed in China. Each of these episodes threatens all of our humanity. Together we pay a price when rights are trampled, and guess what? Yes, together we win when rights are protected. Real change, as we have seen so clearly this spring, is driven from within. And when there is an opportunity for change, America has to be there to help. Through the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Middle East Partnership Initiative, the Millennium Challenge grants, and other initiatives, we do know that we can save children's lives, that we can expose corruption, we can train journalists, we can defend advocates for human rights, we can provide a lifeline to refugees. The most important thing we can do is stand up at every opportunity to support America's ideals of democracy and human rights, to use our platform to support those individuals who are striving for reform. The battle continues right here at home, where those words from Tennyson that Bobby and Teddy loved so much, and the work goes on, where the challenge is still there for us to confront injustice. Robert Kennedy was a man of great faith. He studied the Bible. At the height of violence against African Americans during the civil rights struggle, he once quoted the scriptures and asked of his fellow Americans, what if God was black? It was a profound question. And were he here today, Robert Kennedy would be stunned to see how some Americans can believe in God or profess to, celebrate life, talk about love as the center of religion, and then turn their backs on their fellow man. I believe Robert Kennedy would challenge us to ask, if God is indeed all-powerful as we believe, and if he has created us in his image, as we know, then who are we to permit discrimination among his children? I have faith that we can and will win this fight. It will be long and it will be tough. And we can win it in no small part because of organizations like the RFK Center. Now, sometimes these problems may seem too great to overcome, especially for individuals with little power. But the RFK Center is here to remind us, and reminds us with this award, that that is not true. It has been an unwavering anchor, the center, an unwavering anchor that steadies our nerve in times of challenge and celebrates the bravest among us. It is here to show us that with a little focus and a bit of courage, we can change a world that yields only painfully to change. That is the legacy of the brothers for whom this room was named, and is the legacy that we must live up to. Robert Kennedy would have been amazed by your work, Frank, and Teddy would have been so proud that you are the latest recipient of this award in his brother's name. So I congratulate you. I thank you for your courageous stand. And most importantly, I thank and celebrate the RFK Center for helping all of us to remember the task ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kerry, for your words and for challenging us to do more to rid this world of injustice. And thank you for your commitment to human rights around the world and at home. Now we have a short video that we would like for you all to see, and then we're going to introduce the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Leader this year, Mr. Frank Mugisha. So let's watch the video.
What is it that we stand for? We stand for human freedom, and we stand for human dignity, and we stand for ending discrimination.
The member of parliament who introduced the 2009 Anti-Homosexuality Act is a guy named David Bahati. If this bill were actually to become law in Uganda, consensual conduct would be subjected to life imprisonment with the possibility of the death penalty for certain homosexual acts. All Ugandans would be required to report any suspected homosexual to the police within 24 hours. It would criminalize any discussion, expression, any outreach to LGBT communities, including health-related outreach.
Now the idea that in Uganda we have plans to kill gays. You know that the bill on Bahati is intended to kill homosexuals. That is a view which the entire world has got, yet it's not the case.
There is a clause, however, that does allow capital punishment for repeated acts of homosexuality.
On January 26, 2011, outspoken LGBT activist David Kato was murdered in Uganda. He was beaten to death with a hammer in his home. Kato was a close friend and associate of Frank Mugisha. Just weeks before his death, Kato led a successful lawsuit against the Ugandan newspaper known as Rolling Stone, which had published the names and photos of homosexuals, along with the caption, "Hang them."
Uganda is basically trying to be a universal monitor or police of rights of people. In doing so, they're actually violating rights of their own citizens.
But there are a great many homosexual men and women, gay and lesbian women, who claim very strongly that they have felt that they are homosexual since birth.
They are liars.
When God created the world, God did not create one set of rules for black people and another for whites. God did not say that the tall or the blue-eyed or the big-nosed were superior. God did not say women were better than men or that only heterosexuals would go to heaven. In Uganda, to our shame, prejudice against sexual minorities has been propagated by no less than the president, who has termed homosexuality unnatural and not how God arranged things to be. Just this year, it took an international outcry to finally stop Uganda from passing a law making homosexuality punishable by death in certain circumstances. And this battle is still far from over. Can you believe it? In 2011, for the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights to be presenting the 2011 Human Rights Award to Frank Mugisha today is to reward justice over injustice. It reminds us that Africa cannot afford to reverse the progress it has made in human rights, and that tolerance is an essential human rights ingredient, a critical condition to foster good relations in the human family. To acknowledge the role of Mr. Mugisha and SMART is to acknowledge that prejudice against sexual minorities is as strong as prejudice against black people, against Jews, or women. It is ultimately a reminder that wherever we are and wherever we live, whether our name is Mugisha, Kennedy, or Tutu, we are members of one family, God's family. Thank you, Mr. Mugisha, for the work you are doing. It's close to my heart. God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's recipient of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, Mr. Frank Mugisha of Uganda.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mrs. Robert Kennedy, Honorable John Kerry, members of Congress, Kerry Kennedy, Board of Directors of the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the RFK Center for this recognition, and thank you all, my friends from Sexual Minorities Uganda, Pepe is here, my partner, my family, Center for Constitutional Rights, Trans-Africa for nominating me. Thank you for believing in my work and for supporting me. Thank you all for coming to witness this very important ceremony. I thank you also for the increasing support for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex struggle in Uganda and elsewhere in the world. A few years ago, I never envisioned that I would be addressing this kind of audience, that I would have you listening to me, that I would feel respected, honored, and loved for the work that me and my brave colleagues are doing in my country, Uganda, where I'm not even regarded as a human being. When I started speaking out about my race as a gay person, my idea was to change the way my friends and my neighbors saw me and other people like me. I wanted to be understood. Over the years, I've lost jobs and friends, and most of my relatives don't even talk to my family because of me. Despite intimidation, harassment, and fear of rejection, I've continued doing my work with the hope that not only to be understood, but also to effect real change in society. The change I know will come someday. My country is among many countries that still criminalize homosexuality, and if convicted for a same-sex act, I would be sentenced to jail for life. The law criminalizing homosexuality that has existed on the Ugandan books for over a century has increased harassment and arbitrary arrests for LGBTI persons in my country. However, the existing law has not stopped legislators in Uganda from creating an even more oppressive law that would not only continue to criminalize homosexuality, but also call for the killing of homosexuals. Religious fundamentalists, long-standing culture, ignorance, and the media have also contributed to increased homophobia in Uganda. The LGBTI community faces constant discrimination, violence, and human rights abuses. We are denied access to basic rights such as health care, education, and work. We fear for our lives. This year in January, my colleague from SMAG, David Kato, was murdered. For me, it is still hard to believe that David is gone. He stood up for everyone, not only for the LGBT rights, but for all human rights. For me, David was a mentor, a brother, and a friend. He was, and remains a symbol of hope for me. Many of my friends in Uganda have lost jobs, been expelled from school, and disowned by their families because of who they are. These everyday challenges break my heart, as I've been a victim of this discrimination myself. But I am often brought back to tears when I remember one particular friend. He was a young Ugandan gay man at the age of 19. He passed away in hospital, struggling with HIV/AIDS. His life was cut short, not because of the illness, but because he was denied care and support. Not only was it difficult for him to access adequate health care, but he could not maintain proper treatment because after he came out to his family, when he told them he was living with HIV/AIDS and was a homosexual person, he was abandoned. Without any income, he struggled living a life of discrimination until his last day. Last December, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon expressed concerns about human rights violations due to sexual orientation and gender identity, paving the way for the first ever resolution condemning discrimination against LGBTI persons worldwide. In addition, the Human Rights Council at the United Nations recently reviewed the human rights situation in my country. The state joined anti-gay statements and echoed false accusations that we coerce children to join homosexuality. We challenge these accusations. Why would any person ever accept being coerced to join a group that is hated, harassed, and considered inhuman by Ugandan society? During meetings at the UN, my country accepted some of the recommendations and promised to investigate and prosecute violations against LGBTI persons. This is going to be my role to play. I'll follow up on the commitment and make sure that my country does indeed live up to the obligations made at the Human Rights Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Kennedy said, "Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of those acts will be written the history of our generation." In my way, I'm working to change that portion of events, which is my power to change. Today I received the RFK Human Rights Award, a symbol of human rights for all. It's an encouragement to individuals and groups around the world struggling to be recognized in societies they are not accepted. We may not be accepted and recognized in our own communities, but with this award, we know that we are being heard and there is hope. The RFK Human Rights Award is another voice for our message this year, adding to the voice of the United Nations. The RFK Center, through this award, tells the world that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people are entitled to full equality. LGBTI persons in Uganda, Africa, and elsewhere in the world are standing up, with the support of our allies refusing to be treated as second-class citizens. This award and the long-term partnership that we are starting with the RFK Center brings new energy, inspiration, and courage. I'll continue to speak out. I'll continue to demand that my government create laws and policies to protect LGBTI persons from violence and discrimination. I'll continue to advance human rights in my country. I'll continue to challenge the criminalization of homosexuality. I'll continue to educate my country to accept diversity. I welcome your support and I thank you all.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for your bravery, your inspiration, your courage, and your sacrifice on behalf of the cause of human rights. My friends, it is now my great honor to present one of our country's greatest advocates for social justice and human rights. Assistant Secretary of State Michael Posner was the Executive Director and President of Human Rights First, which under his leadership was at the forefront of refugee protection, challenging crimes against humanity and combating discrimination. Assistant Secretary Posner played a key role in realizing the first U.S. law providing political asylum, the adoption of the International Criminal Court statute and the Global Network Initiative to promote free expression and internet privacy rights. He has served as a judge for the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award and as a member of the board of the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. In 2009, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, where he continues his strong advocacy of upholding human rights for all. Please welcome Assistant Secretary of State Michael Parsons.
Thank you, Donna. I'm so happy to be here and to join this ceremony honoring Frank Mugisha and his organization, Sexual Minorities in Uganda. It's great to see you, Ethel. Your energy, your compassion, your lifelong commitment to human rights are an inspiration to us all. Thank you for what you do. And I want to say thanks to Carrie also, who's been my partner in the human rights vineyards for more than a quarter of a century. I've seen firsthand, both in this country and around the world, the power of Carrie's advocacy, her clear voice, how she inspires people and advances the cause. So thank you, Carrie, for all that you do. I was very proud to serve as a judge for these awards for several years and then as a board member of the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights. I serve with pride first because of the extraordinarily important work the center does in supporting frontline human rights activists, and also because the center honors the legacy of Robert Kennedy, who was for me a personal hero and an inspiration, as he was to so many people in this room and in this country and in this world. I was in high school when Robert Kennedy ran for president in 1968. At a particularly difficult moment in this country's history, he inspired me, as he did so many others, to get engaged and get involved. I stood on a street corner in Chicago passing out campaign flyers for RFK because, to me, he represented the best of America. He was a messenger of hope and the possibility at a time when our nation was so deeply divided. Sadly, we are again living through a period when our nation is again deeply divided, and when too many people are losing hope and turning away from public service. Yet I believe there is much reason for hope, and a greater need perhaps than ever for people, especially young people, to answer the call for public service, whether in government or outside. From where I sit, I can see the opportunity for us to lead around the world, not only on the basis of our military might or our economic power, but on the strength of our ideals. Founded on the principles of human rights and individual freedom, this country continues to be a beacon to the rest of the world and on the things that matter greatly to those of us who are assembled here. For the last 2 years, I've been proud to serve in the Obama administration and under Secretary Clinton, to be part of an administration that is redefining America's global role around the theme of principled engagement. Principled engagement means that we don't sit on the sidelines, but we enter the playing field, whether it's at the United Nations Human Rights Council or in bilateral relations with countries where the challenges to human rights are formidable. Principled engagement also means a real commitment to universal human rights standards everywhere, and a commitment, for example, to the proposition that LGBT rights are human rights. My job takes me to the far corners of the world where courageous human rights activists like Frank struggle for what is right in circumstances that often seem overwhelming. Last month, I met a remarkable group of human rights activists in Nizhny Novgorod and Kazan in Russia. Last week, I did the same thing in Rangoon, Burma, where, among others, I met a former student leader from Generation 88 who was released just weeks ago after serving 23 years in jail. And though fundamental change in these places will be long and hard, and these and other activists draw courage and strength from our engagement and our support. These people and others I meet in the distant places around the world share a special quality which has been noted several times here and which Robert Kennedy called moral courage. My favorite quote, which Senator Kerry read, he said that moral courage is a rare commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. And indeed, as he said, it is the one essential quality of those who seek to change a world that yields most painfully to change. He concluded by saying, and Kerry quoted this, that those with moral courage will find themselves with companions in every corner of the world. So Frank, we're proud to honor you today, and we want you to know that in Robert Kennedy's words, as a man of moral courage, you have many companions today here and in fact around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Secretary, for your strong and powerful remarks. Frank, we are on your side. We will stand by you. And as you continue your work, we shall echo your words. We will become your voice. And yes, we will follow you on Twitter at Frank Mugisha and friend you on Facebook. As the RFK Center partners with Frank in the fight for human rights, each and every one of us should consider ourselves a partner in this struggle, whether in Uganda or here in the United States or from wherever we call home. This November 20th would have been Robert Kennedy's 86th birthday. And as we honor Frank today for carrying forward Robert Kennedy's vision, his legacy, we are reminded of what that legacy is. Historian and RFK biographer Arthur Schlesinger Jr. wrote, "Robert F. Kennedy was a man of passionate conviction, carrying a message of change, and for the forlorn and dispossessed, a message of hope. This is our season of hope, hope in its most powerful sense, that one person can make a difference." After hearing today of the dire situation for Frank and so many others in Uganda, we must nevertheless maintain hope and respond to RFK's clarion call to all of us to create change, everlasting change. Robert Kennedy often quoted the poet Alfred Tennyson, as Senator Kerry reminded us. "Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world." And so we leave here invigorated by his legacy and inspired by Frank's courage. We leave here committed to the task of shaping a newer world. Thank you all for coming today. We welcome you to stay with us and to join us to meet Frank, take pictures, post it on Facebook, and tweet all about it. And please enjoy our lovely reception in this room following the ceremony. Thank you on behalf of the Board of Directors of the RFK Center, and God bless you all.